the Greek government have attempted, superficially or not, to some extent, to crack down on Golden Dawn. Their lead MPs have been arrested and they're thinking about revoking their parliamentary immunity. However, there's a very real chance that this is superficial. This is still a developing situation, but despite this, there's still collaboration between police and Golden Dawn, and the police have in fact been infiltrated to a great extent by Golden Dawn. You saw in that video, which is cooperation between between Golden Dawn and the military, who are also going around and doing searches. So it's no exaggeration to say that Greece is probably the worst situation in Europe. Migrants I've personally spoken to, I remember one Iranian dissident who fled around during the Green Revolution told me that for him, moving through Greece was worse than Iran under Ahmadinejad, which I think really says something about how far gone the situation is. And another thing is that whenever riots break out against the Greek state, when people are too pissed off and rise up, migrants tend to join in with those riots and join the fight back against the police, because there is, just as in Spain where we have values of resistencia, in Greece as well, there's a commonality of interest between the oppressed people of that country and refugees and migrants. So there's many cases of fighting together. It's another video I'd like to show, but I realise I can't stack you full of hundreds of YouTube videos because there's time, of an anti-fascist motorcycle patrol that goes through Athens looking for members of Golden Dawn. And whenever they go through migrant areas, they're applauded and cheered, and there's a great deal of cooperation there. So there is some hope left, but the Greek situation has deteriorated to such a point that it is really shocking. Okay, so that's Greece. Now Germany. Moving on now from the peripheral countries, from Spain or Italy or Greece, up to the sort of northern European area. Most of the time migrants are only trying to pass through the southern countries, whereas the northern countries are where they're aiming for to get asylum. So in order to do this, in order to kind of control this, I should quickly explain the Dublin II Convention and the Eurodac system. The Dublin II Convention was agreed by multiple European states in the European Union that any asylum seeker that arrives in the European Union has to claim asylum in their first country of arrival. Obviously, the intention of this was to limit how many people can get into the rich northern countries. So it kind of devolves the authority of controlling the frontiers to the southern countries. To enforce the Dublin II Convention, there's a Eurodac system. This is a European-wide database of fingerprints. So if they ever catch a refugee, then they take their fingerprints and upload this to the system. So anyone who's travelled through Europe to another part and has been stopped at least one fingerprinted knows that if they're caught in another country, they can be sent back to the first one. And this is rolled out across the European Union. The way that migrants try and counteract this, because they know that being sent to one of the southern countries can ultimately mean deportation to their countries of origin, which tend to be a death sentence. So the way they try and counteract that is by mutilating their fingerprints, either with razor blades, acid, or a hot stove, so the fingerprints are burnt off and they can't be fingerprinted and sent back. Unfortunately, fingerprints tend to regrow, so this has to be a sort of repeated process until the scarification builds up enough so there's no fingerprints. Okay, so that's Dublin II and Eurodac. Moving on to Germany. Germany is one of the wealthy countries in the EU. It's been soaking up all those impoverished Portuguese and Greek migrants who have left their countries because there's no work. And compared to the rest of the European Union, it's doing relatively well in the crisis. For that reason, lots of migrants attempt to go there. And also for that reason, it has one of the most stringent systems of migrant control and detention. Migrants who are waiting for their claims process will either have to live under, I'm not sure how to say this, residence plicht, I think, or in a lager, which is the lagerplicht. So residence plicht is that you, like in the UK, you're a resident of that area, but you're restricted to a really, really small space. Sometimes as small as 15 square kilometres. That's not a city, that's like a park, it's a certain district that you're restricted to, which is very controlling. And the people that aren't there are in the lagers, which the German term for a detention centre. Again, these detention centres are really, really, really harshly run. The objective is to make sure that they're removed from German society and make it physically impossible for them to integrate until their claims be processed. Like in the rest of the European Union, this takes a very, very long time. There's a bureaucracy and people can be waiting years and So they're stuck either in 15 square kilometres of the city or in a prison for trying to have asylum, to claim asylum. Even if you don't think that it's criminal to cross a border and be a refugee, I think that's still fairly objectionable. The result of this really harsh policy is a massive fight back of refugees in Germany, and what might be the most significant development for people fighting the European border system, potentially in decades. So what happened was in where was it? In Würzburg, in March 2012, multiple migrants commit suicide at the same time. It's the norm for migrants to commit suicide in detention centres. This happens all the time. It's not really reported, but it happens. It's striking that migrants will commit suicide in the detention centre, but they won't do so in their home countries if they fled as refugees, or crossing the border, which I think speaks for itself about the repressive nature of these detention centres. In Würzburg, it's multiple suicides in one go. And this for the other migrants was too much. They correctly deduced that they were likely to do the same thing or lose their minds if they stayed in detention centres. So they protested and occupied, I believe, the sort of square in Würzburg in a sort of Occupy style thing. They then began a wet hunger strike and sewed their lips shut. This action was then followed by multiple other migrants in other parts of Germany. They would march to the town squares, they would protest, and they would sew shut their lips. From this, and from coordination between them, they created a coordination committee of striking asylum seekers in Germany. And their intention was to march and have a march of what they described as non-citizens, which is trying to come up with words that have pejoratives like refugee or asylum seeker. A march towards Berlin. This started in September 2012. For 9 days there was a strike outside of the Brandenburg Tor, which is the Brandenburg Gate, one of the most iconic parts of things in Berlin. That was a 9-day hunger strike. And it won small concession from the state. They essentially said they'll reconsider some people's asylum claims. There were a lot of political conflicts between non-citizens and their German supporters, basically threatening the autonomy of the migrants and against the sort of German actors coming in and trying to run the borders. They're one of the biggest stumbling blocks for this movement, unfortunately. So the idea that's come out of this is German no border people now talk about critical whiteness, which is something I've never heard before until I spoke to German no borders. And also, the hunger strike may no longer be in effect, but they managed to occupy abandoned school as an autonomous migrant squad. So there are no Germans there, and it's only non-citizens that are allowed to enter. One of the other things that was a consequence of this was that Iranian dissidents who were part of the non-citizen protest managed to take action against the Iranian state by attacking the Iranian embassy, which we have a video here. Distance, so they're part of the Green Movement, and lots of them had to flee Iran because Ahmadiyya was cracking down on them. So I'm pretty sure that the fact that video got out there, and people in Iran can see that Iranian embassies are having their flag burnt down, and having the colours of the Iranian revolution, green, splashed all over the front doors, that's invaluable. I actually heard the story of how that video was taken. recorders that went over the wire with them, and he was the only person with a video camera, so the onus was on him to film it and record it. After that happened, about half of them escaped and the other half were arrested by the German police. And he knew that they were going to try and destroy that video footage so the news couldn't get out. So his solution, which I have so much admiration for, this mad James Bond idea, was to take out the memory card of his camera and put it under his tongue. And then while he was waiting to be taken to the police station, he said, "I'm really thirsty, can I get a drink?" So he bought a bottle of water from the machine, drank all the water, spat the memory, the SD card, into the bottle, and then threw it in a bin. And then when he'd been released, like obviously they searched everything he had microscopically for this memory card, couldn't find it. And then when they released it, took his friends back to that bin and picked up the memory card. So I don't know how the hell someone in such pressure could think of such a James Bond situation. So much respect. Anyway, there's this movement is still kind of ongoing. There's no media coverage. I mean, I don't know if anyone here heard on British news that there was a mass migrant hunger strike outside the Brandenburg Gate in Germany, right? But this is still ongoing. There are still migrants organising. Before now, most of the initiative has come from the borders, which is Europeans. We're trying to improve the migrant situation, but this is a very interesting development. Migrants themselves are fighting for their own rights. And this has spread to Austria. There are multiple occupations there in Vienna. At one point, I think they shelled from the church. At one point, they tried to take over the town hall. There are stuff going on in Belgium, marches and strikes in Poland, and stuff in France as well. So basically, the German detention system, by being so stringent, created this really awesome movement, and that's still developing. I mean, this is all happening in 2012. I'm not entirely sure where they are now, but I'm sure as hell that they'll still be organised. Okay, so next is France. France has a longer history than lots of these other countries of integration. Obviously, they had a lot of colonies, and during decolonialisation, especially after the Second World War, they integrated, to an extent, some migrants who were encouraged to come to France, be it Moroccans or Algerians, to make up for the labour shortages after the Second World War. So France has this history of integration, and it has a history of colonialism as well, both internally and externally. France has had long-lasting institutions, and the migration situation now in France is really a continuation of struggles happening in the 50s and 60s. To give you an example, the police force, the French riot police force, Compagnie Républicaine de Sécurité, CRS, massacred 200 Algerians in the 1950s in Paris and threw their bodies in the River Seine. That police force is still there. Like in the UK, after our police force murdered a large number of people, we reformed them and give them new hat badges so they look a bit different. But in France, it's very much these institutions are still in place that people have been fighting against for decades and decades. They did, however, despite these struggles, there was France was generally regarded as quite pluralistic, multicultural. Decreasingly so in the last decade. 2006, they began deportation quotas, which I think there were a few countries to do that, where they would preset targets of how many people they want to deport every year. I mean, the coalition, our coalition, talks about deporting more asylum seekers every year, but I'm pretty sure they haven't set quotas. And they went for 25,000 forced removals per year. And just as in any society where you set these goals and have like a 5-year plan or something, it just resulted in a rushed process with very little specification as exactly what they're doing and what they're going for. It was all about getting numbers. It wasn't necessarily about enforcing the letter of the law. So this led to, again, suicides, massive police abuse, people dying in police custody, huge psychological damage. I mean, you can see there's women and kids being taken away by the police and deported back to their countries, which can itself be a death sentence. Some of the other legislation that hang on a sec. What else? Oh yeah, there's also has increased police sweeps to pick people up as illegal refugees. You see police in France in train stations, airports, and they also come into cafes and restaurants. One of the experiences I had of this was I was interviewing people in a detention centre in northern France, just trying to get a feel on what was going on there. And one of the people I spoke to, who wasn't a migrant from here to England, like most of them, he was a guy called Mohammed Rais from Morocco, and he came from Amiens, which is a bit further away, and he'd been arrested by the police on his wedding day to a French citizen. So they got him before they could tie the knot and potentially allow him some chance of setting in France. So that's a routine sort of thing that's happening and going on all the time. One of the other things they come up with is délit de solidarité, which means the crime of solidarity. This isn't the official name of the law. I think there's a much longer-winded, complicated one, but it aptly describes what it is. Essentially, they have openly criminalised the support of migrants. The test case for this was, that being it's illegal to help migrants, was a man called Leopold Jeffrier, who's a 70-year-old volunteer for the Red Cross. He was fined €500 for letting a Congolese man use his home to receive mail, because most migrants don't have fixed addresses, so they can't, again, it's impossible to integrate, they can't receive anything in the post if you don't have an address. So this was chalked up by the judge as false proof of accommodation, and the 70-year-old Red Cross guy got a €500 fine with the threat of jail time if it happened again. France have also done mass deportations of Roman people. Now, I haven't mentioned Roman people at all, because, again, we don't have time, but this is another dimension of the struggle. I mean, you saw it in the UK with, what was the place that was, thank you, Dale Farm. Yes, you saw it in the UK with Dale Farm. See the same thing in Italy, Roman people are forcibly fingerprinted. And this is another aspect of it. So France tried to just out and out deport an entire Roman population. 10,000 people shot back to Romania and Bulgaria. That's another dimension of it. Another aspect of slavery in France is hunger strikes. Lillian migrants who had been waiting for years and years and years for their asylum claims to be processed, finally kind of snapped and thought that it was taking too long. And they went on a 73-day hunger strike. I went to one of the demonstrations in November, and it was really quite appalling. They tried going in church and seeking shelter there, because often clergy will allow migrants to shelter, but the police evicted them, so they were living outside the church. It was raining most of the time. It's North France, absolutely shit weather. Sometimes snowing. They did a 73-day hunger strike, and the most they got from the French state was concessions. A very long-winded French document saying that they would renegotiate their timetable and be integrated a bit quicker. But also, I didn't know you could go on hunger strike for 73 days. I think even Bobby Sands and the IRA hunger strikers in the H blocks in Ireland didn't last that long. So ultimately, what this was a statement from the French government saying, you can hunger strike until you die, we're still not going to give you your papers. So it lasted 73 days, and they won a concession, but got massive amounts of support, got a really big movement, and got more refugees and non-citizens willing to fight. One of the hotspots in France is Calais, which is, of course, in the Pas-de-Calais region, and it's the closest part of France to England. It's where the Eurostar tunnel goes from Calais to Dover. This is a real hotspot of depression, because there are loads of refugees there that want to try and travel to England. But just like with the fence in Morocco, the UK says it's not a problem because it's still on French soil. You can't claim asylum in the UK until you get to the UK, which is extremely difficult. This is also the area where I personally have the most experience, but I'm not going to talk at length about it, because hopefully I have enough material for a second talk, fingers crossed. So I'll leave that for another day. But suffice to say that there are massive amounts of repression, loads of people being arrested over and over again, systematic use of arrest to make it impossible for people to get where they're trying to go, sometimes up to 3 times in one day. Also, economic warfare, so sleeping spaces are very far away from the eating spaces, and get arrested between them. Shelters destroyed, tents are destroyed, water points are hit with CS gas, sleeping bags are routinely taken out, and also any reading materials, Bibles and Qurans have been desecrated before, and also just straight up violence or beatings and gassings, and routinely people die from police abuse or just from the cold and conditions. So to give you an idea of what that looks like, there's a video here which was recorded by Calais Migrant Solidarity, which is the Calais branch of No Borders, who were monitoring a standard raid. Because there's no provided accommodation, because the French state says you have to go to England. If you want to go to England, we're not going to take care of you. If you claim asylum in France, we'll look after you. If you want to go to England, it's your problem. And the English say, you're in France, this isn't our problem until you get to England. Again, it's no one's responsibility. So as there's no given sleeping space, migrants just basically have to sleep out in the open, and this normally results in small groups of tents somewhere in the outskirts of the city. And then that will result in turn in a police raid, and they arrest some of the migrants, leave some others, and destroy their stuff. So this is just another raid, really. There's like tens of hundreds that happen on a routine basis. That guy was shouting "Vive Alger, Vive Algerie," the commander of the French police border unit there. It's an Algerian, or third or second generation Algerian migrants. Their parents were moved from Algeria. And this is humongously ironic, and the migrants know it too, which is why they were shouting "Vive Alger, Vive Algerie." One of the interesting things I think about this is if you look at the municipal workers, I don't know if we can get a good shot of them. The guys in the white suits. I can't get a good image of them now, but you saw it, right? There are all those guys in the white suits wearing tents and sleeping bags and stuff. Those suits they're wearing are like chemical suits. So it means you're wearing thick gloves, this like white protective suit and a face mask. It's the kind of thing you wear for a chemical or gas attack, like NBCUs, this sort of thing. They're wearing chemical suits going to a migrant sleeping place. No borders, and I've been in there before and wandered around. I slept for a few hours outside one of those tents, as did the no borders people. But for in the eyes of the state, that's like a biological germ hazard, and like you can't go in there without wearing a protective suit to stop you getting diseases. If like a lot of time when migrants would go into the doctors and hospitals around there, they'd give them a tetanus shot straight away, not for any real reason, just because they assumed that migrants spread disease. I mean, it's really like colonial attitude towards migrants that they're this other that are a threat to such an extent that they need special protective clothing to handle this stuff, which I thought at the time was really striking that happened. So that's Calais, but obviously similar stuff going on in all the rest of France. Moving on to the last country we'll be looking at, which is Britain. You may be familiar with this country, I'm not sure. So one of the most striking things about the UK is that it practices indefinite detention of migrants. Now most countries take a long time to process asylum claims. It can be many years, but it's not many that say openly that they'll have indefinite detention. Again, this is particularly relevant because there's no crime that's been committed here. The only crime is by crossing a border and being deemed illegal just by dint of not having the right to naturalize skin. So this indefinite detention has massive psychological consequences on people. Again, suicides, self-harming, post-traumatic stress disorder, it'll all come out of being in a detention centre, having done nothing wrong, with no idea when you will or won't be let out. And obviously, this isn't part of the judicial process. This isn't criminal detention, this is administrative detention. So we don't know what to do with you, certainly don't want you to integrate, so we're just going to put you in a lockup. This indefinite detention is pretty bad for migrants, and I don't think it does any favours for our democracy, but someone it is really good for is security corporations. Those guys that are taking over our policing run most of the run most of the detention centres. So you've got G4S, you've got Serco, Reliance, various of these groups, because they're big budget contracts. So someone's making a lot of money out of these. Another aspect of UK detention is child detention. It was one of the Liberal Democrats' key campaign pledges in the 2010 election to end childhood detention. Surprisingly, as I'm sure you're very well aware by your student fees, Liberal Democrats don't really keep their promises. So instead of abolishing childhood detention, what they did was a superficial adjustment and change of details. So there was a new construction centre built that wasn't run as the usual ones were. And this is Pease Cottage in West Sussex. It's not just run by a security group like G4S, it's run by security and also by a child's charity, which is Bernardo's. Logo or slogan, Bernardo's believes in children. Bernardo's actually believes in locking up children. Bernardo's didn't participate in this partnership with G4S, then it would be unworkable and they wouldn't be able to detain children there. However, Bernardo's provide the social and welfare aspect of this detention centre, which is actually, they don't call it a detention centre, they call it pre-departure accommodation, which is this nice Orwellian slant they've got in there. Private corporations aren't just responsible for the detention process, they're also responsible for deportation. They also do this very, very badly. The best known case was in 2010. An Angolan chap called Jimmy Mavenga was murdered by G4S as he was getting on a plane in Britain on the way to Angola. The official report afterwards said that he was restrained to death. But if you ever restrain someone, you can't really restrain them until they die. This is, again, like the case of the guy who had a displaced trachea. He wasn't restrained to death. There's a move that G4S does called the carpet karaoke, which is if someone sat down, you take the back of their head and you force it in between their legs to such an extent they can't properly move their lungs anymore. So what happened was, this guy was shouting and protesting, saying they're going to kill me in Angola, and in order to try and stop him from shouting, they pushed his head between his legs. This panicked him so much and he continued shouting. Apparently his last words were, "You're suffocating me," and he was suffocated to death on that flight. The UK government has issued what it calls a conditional apology, saying they apologise as much as they can be considered responsible for this happening. So, pretty mealy mouth, really. That's the private corporations. Oh wait, there's one other stuff here as well. Yeah, one of the detention centres with the worst reputations is Yarl's Wood, which is a detention centre for women only. There have been 3 instances of hunger strikes at Yarl's Wood because the conditions are so bad. And the last one in 2010 involved 70 women taking part in the protest. So they're locked in an endless corridor without water or toilet facilities for multiple days. One woman tried to escape by jumping out a window and almost severed a finger, but she was denied medical treatment for about a week before they looked at it. I'm not entirely sure, but I believe that this is connected to the case of a woman who was detained there, who saw instances of abuse and was going to make a complaint and take it to the judicial system, so the solution was to deport her before she could give evidence. But in addition to that, in Yarl's Wood, this place with the very bad rap, there was a fire in 2002. The building was burnt down following a protest by detainees. The protest was triggered by someone being physically restrained by staff. When the fires began, the head of G4S security ordered all staff to exit the building, locking the detainees inside the building, which is still in the frame. 5 people got injured in that. Although there's an investigation, as per usual, G4S were never prosecuted. There's also the death of Manuel Bravo, who was another Angolan refugee, and he hanged himself whilst awaiting deportation. He was going to be deported with his 13-year-old son following a dawn raid. So before he was deported, because he knew he would probably be tortured and then killed, he thought he'd try and get a cleaner death and hang himself in his cell. That's detention. Then we also have the role of UKBA, United Kingdom Border Agency. Partially the racist ban, which was a ban that basically said, go home or face arrest if you're in the UK illegally, driven around the most multicultural parts of London. Very sensitive policy. I believe they're pulling that back in. I mean, even those, friendly guys who love everybody said it was hate. I mean, that really says something. Like, so there was that. And they also began what they call fishing raids. where they basically stop people in the street and ask them about their migration status. So if this video works, we will see one of those.
The whole idea of having arrest-trained immigration officers on the street is still very new, and I don't think the majority of the public are aware of our role and what we are doing.
Hello, sir. I'm from the UK Border Agency. Can you tell me what country you come from?
Right. What did you say your wife's name was? Are you lawfully in the country? Are you lawfully present in this country?
Yeah. What commission have you given to stay in this country? How did you get EU national? Because you were married, so you are married too.
Well, you national.
You're married to an EU national. Where's your wife from?
France.
From France. Where's your wife now?
I was in France.
Right. Can you just have a look at my colleagues? Just have a read for us. Suspicion of entering the UK on an immigration offence. You do not have to say anything. But it may only defect. So if you don't mention when you question something you should lay online in court. Anything you do say may give me evidence. Do you understand that?
Yeah, there's no response.
You have to shout because I'm paid. You guys come to Africa. Do whatever you want to do. Don't talk to me like that. What do you mean? Don't talk to me. I'm not a criminal. I'm only talking about rights.
Tell me why you ran.
Sorry?
Why did you run? If you're not a criminal.
That's my boss.
You get hurt, you catch your bus, you're good, yeah. Yeah, okay. Shuffle back, yeah, and lean against the wall.
What's up?
So a couple of points about that video. First of all, I'm going to throw a question at you. What do you think, when the UKPA workers were questioning people, what do you think those people had in common? The people they were questioning?
None of them were white.
Thank you. Yes, none of them were white. Basically, the type of methodology they use to question people is outright racist, which in itself makes it illegal. They're supposed to question everything discriminatory, but they don't. They go, you're not white, I'll ask you. You're not white, I'll ask you. You're not white, I'll ask you. The other thing is, this is a new policy. This is happening quite a lot in France, but it's a relatively new development in the UK, where UKPA officers, as you can see, they're mostly dressed in civilian clothing, and they put on these stab-proof vests and their equipment belts, you get all military and drive around in vans. They're supposed to, when they begin the interview process, point out a series of things. Why they're stopping someone, what power they're stopping someone has, just as the police are, and also that they're not obliged to answer any of the questions. They never do this. So that automatically renders the search and the questioning process illegal. The next thing that's interesting about this video is, you see they've got two guys. They grabbed the guy that tried to run. They also grabbed this guy who was kicking off and telling them what they're doing wrong, and they threatened him with a truncheon, and then they put him in handcuffs. The UKPA have given police powers to look for migrants, to look for asylum seekers. They don't have any powers over UK citizens whatsoever. So the guy they've just arrested, that was an illegal arrest, because if he's a British citizen, then they don't have any power over him, but they just put him in handcuffs anyway, because they've got stab-proof vests, they've got equipment belts, and they're driving around in vans. So just like the police, power goes to their head. Or maybe he was black, so they thought he was a refugee. I'm really not sure. But yeah, that's UKPA. This video is actually taken from a TV series about UKPA, which was aired a few years ago, which is super useful because it shows you like how they operate. And in Calais, we've downloaded all of them, and we show as many migrants as possible because there's a section on like how they search the vans going into the UK. So we can then show that to migrants to show them what not to do and to be aware of CO2 sensors, to thermal heat detectors, stuff like that. So we're very grateful to UKPA for giving away some of their secrets there. So yeah, in the UK it's kind of a mismatch of private security corporations making cheap buck from deporting people or detaining them, UKPA, which is this government body with a really bad record, who are doing everything illegally, and they also have a backlog of 500,000 cases. So it's referred to in the news as like this large amount of work that they haven't done, it's very lazy of them. What it actually is people's lives are on hold for a limited amount of time while they wait for a confirmation or denial as to whether or not they can remain in the UK legally. There's one woman who claimed in 1995, and her claim was finally rejected in 2005. What's that? 17 years, I think, waiting for a claim and then rejected. So that's the situation in some European countries. I don't have time or the information to explain all of them, but there's similar stuff going on everywhere, which, if we kind of zoom out to the European situation, leaves us in a situation like this. There's a low-level conflict going on right across Europe, coming around through southern Spain, Lampedusa, and the central Mediterranean, through Greece, people trying to make it to Eastern Europe, and then also choke points through borders here, through the UK crossing in Calais, and this just, in a similar way, and standardised by the EU, happening all over the continent. This is how we get to answer a question you asked me at the beginning, this is how we get to 15,000 deaths. It's a really high number, but one guy shot in the track here, one guy throttled to death on an aircraft here, someone getting hit by a car as they try and get under a lorry, someone being beaten to death by the police in a police cell, someone stabbed to death by a fascist in Greece. The accumulation of this is this constant, ongoing, low-intensity conflict against the world's most desperate and poor people. And then that's sort of elaborating some of what's going on all over Europe. This is the transborder map, which was made by No Borders and migrant support activists who came from all over Europe and the world to put this together, met in Istanbul. I think possibly some of the symbols might be a bit too small here, but these squares are detention centres, and these fire symbols are hunger strikes or protest detention centres. So everywhere you see a fire there's been someone starving themselves to sort of prove a point and to protest against the detention system. Then I believe the yellow lines are migration routes, and the white lines are then deportation, sometimes arbitrarily without due process. And they've sort of set up choke points and ways of doing this. But yeah, we have this European situation that has developed over the years with next to no scrutiny and next to no accountability. It's just being done in our name, but not really with our consultation. So yeah, SWOT analysis. In my opinion, the EU is not a consultant of human rights. That is farcical. You can not only see this with migration. If you look at austerity policies being applied across the European Union, like Greece and Spain or in Italy or here, or in France or in Germany, austerity in many ways denies the human rights of EU nationals. And then now if we move into migration, then the notion that the European Union is promoting human rights is an absolute joke. It's not only denying human rights by negating and neglecting to look after people, it's deliberate policy to deny human rights. It's deliberate policy to stop human rights, deliberate policy to kill people as they try and get into the European Union. And for me, I find it very problematic using the terminology of human rights. I find it problematic using this liberal discourse. I see this as a class war, or as part of the class war against the global poor. I said at the beginning that at the end of the Cold War, they talked about this sort of borderless world, right, with movements of capital, information, and people happening freely. We have seen a big increase in free movement of information. We have seen a massive increase in free movement of capital. But in order to allow free movement of capital effectively, we can't have free movement of people, because people tend to follow the money. So there's a need for European countries to control their labour markets, and control their labour forces. So they want to be able to bring in an amount of people to be able to work, but potentially sometimes to undercut established groups with good employment rights, and they can bring in illegal refugees that can do this a lot cheaper, and do this sort of in black market ways. I mean, this happened in Lancashire a few years back when some carpet pickers were Chinese drowned in the Morecambe Sands, and they were doing a job that used to be done by unionised British workers. I'm not going to go all British jobs for British workers, but there is an extent of that, the aspect of controlling labour markets being used here. In order to control and deny access to human rights to migrants, they need to be other, they need to be portrayed as this threatening other. So to do this, we have the reputable newspapers, The Sun and the Daily Mail, also a lot of news outlets, so you've got the BBC, you've got the Sky, who will tell these stories that are, as we've seen over and over again, just factually inaccurate and twisting the truth to give us this narrative. I mean, the top one here really got my bloody seat of Calais, the violently breed of migrants who let nothing stop them from Britain. Now, the use of the word breed is interesting here, because it implies that they're a separate species or race, by saying it's a new breed. I mean, who is breeding migrants? It implies the people in Kabul, like, doing the sort of thing that Saruman would do with Uruk-hai, like, oh, this is a better migrant, this is a bit across the border. It's not obviously bullshit, like, that. And of course, we've got the Sun saying that human rights are farcical, kick out foreign lags, so yeah, human rights are a farce. This constant discourse has been going on and on and on for years. At first, it was a discourse that was adopted in order to detract ire of politicians when there wasn't enough housing, or when there was a struggle for resources. It's classic divide and conquer by politicians. Before now, it had been used against Irish migrants in the century before this, and it had been used against Germans and French people, and it's necessary to fight them. Constant divide and conquer. Now it's being used against poor people from all over the place, but after 9/11, now we're at war with the abstract noun as terror, it's being used against Muslims a hell of a lot, and there's this crazy rise in Islamophobia, which makes it very easy to portray migration as a threat, rather than an inevitable consequence of a global system that puts people in poverty. Yeah, to quote Churchill, an iron curtain is falling across Europe. This time it doesn't run north to south, this time it doesn't run east to west, it runs north to south. So we've got this fortification of hard European borders against the global south, which is why there is no borders calling the term fortress Europe. It is being fortified against entrance of the people, and we see a lot of similarities with some of the darkest moments in European history. Greece is the most striking example where you have these concentration camps, but the fact that there are police and state forces on the street rounding people up, that you have this creation of this victimized part of society. Another thing that I think we need to note is that all these practices and policies that are being employed against migrants, and the infrastructures and ways of doing things that are being set up and installed and becoming institutionalized and becoming normal, these can very easily be employed against other people. So it's like that poem that they have for the Holocaust. First they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out. Not implying that that's inevitable, but just saying that these are out there now, this is becoming normalised, this is now a thing, so it'd be very easy to use them against, say, students, if they began protesting. Don't know if anyone saw a thing that happened today about a police officer in Cambridge being covertly filmed by a Cambridge student. But yes, these technologies are applicable. The image in the bottom right, I'm not implying that all of Europe are Nazis, I'm saying that there are neo-Nazi groups, for example, Golden Dawn, or Front National in France, who are attacking migrants. So there's this impossible situation for people where it's a death sentence at home, it's very dangerous in Europe, it's a lose-lose situation. Okay, so for the rousing conclusion, yeah, we have a responsibility to do something about this if we don't agree with it. These policies are being enacted in our name, and ultimately, okay, none of us are being elected or prime ministers or politicians, but it's our money resources, the job that will be poured into this, and we have the responsibility. Also, I think we need to acknowledge that the border is the problem. You can't reform this. You can't appeal to human rights. We've tried that multiple times. The base of the issue is the fact that we have these frontiers, that we have nation states with inaccessible, where it's impossible to access it. Also, I think that it's impossible to reform these problems because these policies and this European border system is a direct continuation of previous European policy of colonialism, where we've gone into countries and taken their resources. Now we don't need to colonize them, we have transnational corporations to do it for us without having to conquer the country. However, it's this continuation, so I don't see this problem as being reformed. The only thing I can see as solving it is a radical transformation in the way we see the world and the way we see people in need, and recognising them as fellow human beings, instead of a threat, instead of another, instead of an illegal, just seeing humans to humans. And there is resistance. There is the No Border movement that I'm a member of. No Borders was formed in the 1990s as part of the Alter Globalization movement, which is this massive upsurge of different movements, all with particular objectives. So there's environmental people, there are human rights people, and then there were like migrant solidarity people, but it was all against what they saw as new developing neoliberal capitalism. But groups in the UK, groups in Europe, in the US, in Australia, I think in the US they're called no más muertes, which is Spanish for no more deaths. They're a different name in Australia. And yeah, we have local groups across the country, nothing in Lancaster, but this one in Manchester. And there's a constant presence in Calais, so if people are interested, this is the first thing to say, go to Calais and get involved. Right, final video before I shut up and let you all go. This is No Borders in Australia, and it is, in my opinion, one of the most successful No Borders activists to date. There's a detention centre called Woomera, which is in the middle of a desert, and the Australian No Borders activists took action against that, and you will see that now. Never wear short skirts in prison right now.
I think the police weren't very, very prepared, and we managed to rip down the fence. People walked over it, and now we're here, and we're faced with the detainees who throughout all this time have been saying that they just wanted to meet us in person. And I guess it's not close it gets, but at least it's something. We're able to communicate with them for the first time in a really long time. These people haven't seen anything like this before. I don't think the Australian people have seen anything like this either. And I just hope that one day we can come back stronger and actually rip down that other fence that keeps them caged inside.
مملكة بشر دوست من دينا نستبيش رياسته من بخداك وشتاني روادش لمغني
and go right up to the other fence, face to face with the refugees. They were doing their own actions. They had their own things happening in there, and I think, yeah, I can't really explain just what it was like. It was full on.
Why is it that somebody who didn't commit suicide in fleeing the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, who survived the boat trip to Australia, but it's only when they come here that they want to commit suicide. They want to jump onto barbed wire and do what they have to do to get out of this hellhole. So I'm proud of every single young person who did what they could to get those people out.
The actions of the protesters are condemned by the government. These actions will not be tolerated and do nothing to advance the cause that they stand for.
The government double speak to finish it off. Breaking criticism does not help people's freedom. So that's the Rumara prison breakout. To this day, 11 people who escaped from there are accounted for in liberty. And that, if there's what No Borders stand for in a short message, that's it. Basically, smash these prisons open, get people out, and give them the freedom they want. Okay, yeah, I believe that's it in my presentation. You'll find behind you over there some leaflets, information, and some stickers and free stuff. It's all free. We love free stuff. And I'm also, if I get time, this has been a bit last minute, I'm going to pull up some of the links and resources I used to construct this presentation on the Facebook